The worst mistake of my life began on a lonely stretch of Interstate 70 cutting through the endless darkness of Kansas, where the road runs so straight and empty at night that it feels like you're driving through a void rather than across land. And I remember glancing at the clock on my dashboard as it turned 2:11 a.m., just as my GPS lost signal and the radio dissolved into static, leaving me alone with the hum of the engine and the unsettling feeling that I had somehow crossed into a place where normal rules didn't apply anymore. And I tried to shake it off by focusing on the road ahead until I noticed a green exit sign emerging from the darkness that I didn't remember seeing before, labeled simply "Last Exit," with no town name, no distance marker, nothing but those two words glowing under my headlights. And I hesitated because I didn't need to exit. Yet something about the emptiness of the highway ahead made me feel like continuing forward would be a worse decision than turning off. So against my better judgment, I took the ramp, which curved downward far longer than any normal exit should have, eventually leading to a narrow two-lane road surrounded by flat fields that stretched endlessly under a moonless sky. And within minutes, I realized there were no reflectors, no road signs, no houses, nothing to indicate this road was meant to exist. And that's when I saw the headlights appear behind me, impossibly close, as if they had materialized from the darkness itself, blindingly bright in my rearview mirror, yet casting no light onto the road. And no matter how fast I drove, they stayed at the exact same distance, neither gaining nor falling back, until the engine suddenly sputtered and died, leaving me coasting to a stop in the middle of nowhere as the headlights behind me went out at the same instant, plunging everything into suffocating darkness. And for several seconds there was absolute silence before I heard the sound of a car door opening somewhere behind me, followed by slow footsteps approaching on the gravel, each step deliberate, unhurried, as if whoever was coming knew I had nowhere to go. And I locked the doors and held my breath, watching the side mirror as a tall figure emerged just within view, too tall to be normal, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, standing motionless beside my back seat window. And when I finally forced myself to look directly at it through the glass, there was nothing there, only my own terrified reflection. Yet the handle of the rear door began to lift slowly, as if an invisible hand were trying to open it, and I scrambled into the front seat just as the lock snapped open with a sharp click, even though I hadn't touched it, followed by the sound of the door creaking open and something heavy settling into the back seat behind me, causing the suspension to dip slightly, and the smell hit. Next, damp earth mixed with something metallic like rust, filling the car as condensation formed on the inside of the windows, obscuring everything outside. And I didn't dare turn around because I could feel it sitting there inches behind me, breathing slowly, not like a human, but like something imitating the act of breathing after watching it for the first time. And then in a voice that sounded like multiple voices layered together, it spoke from the darkness, calmly telling me to keep driving forward because the road would end soon. And I don't know how, but the engine suddenly restarted by itself, the dashboard flickering back to life, even though the keys were still in my pocket. And I drove because every instinct told me that disobeying whatever was in the back seat would be worse than doing what it said. And after several miles, a faint glow appeared ahead, revealing a broken guardrail and the edge of a massive drop where the road simply ended, as if it had been torn away. And the voice told me to stop the car and get out, promising that if I stepped forward, everything would finally be quiet. And something about the tone made me realize this was not a request, but a ritual that had been repeated before with other drivers who had taken the exit. And I ran instead, throwing the door open and sprinting back the way I had come without looking behind me, even as I heard the car door slam and footsteps following at the same steady pace, never speeding up yet never falling behind, until distant headlights appeared on a main highway and the sound abruptly stopped, as if whatever had been chasing me could not cross back onto the interstate. And when police later searched for the exit I described, they found nothing at that location. No ramp, no road, no guardrail. Only an unbroken stretch of highway. Yet my car was discovered days later at the bottom of a ravine miles away, engine off, keys still in the ignition, back seat soaked with dark mud and deep impressions in the upholstery, as if something extremely heavy had been sitting there for a very long time, waiting for the next driver to take the last exit. I had been driving for nearly 6 hours straight on a deserted stretch of Interstate 55 heading toward Missouri when exhaustion started creeping in, the kind that makes the road blur and the darkness feel heavier than normal. So when I saw a faded sign for a rest stop ahead, I felt relieved even though something about the area looked wrong from a distance. Like the lights were too dim and the parking lot too empty for a major highway facility. And when I pulled in, there were only two other vehicles parked far apart under flickering lamps that buzzed loudly in the silence. And I remember stepping out of the car and noticing how cold the air felt compared to just seconds before, carrying a faint smell like wet asphalt after rain, even though the sky was completely clear and the building itself looked older than any functioning rest stop should have been, with peeling paint and dark windows reflecting nothing but my own movement. Yet the door was unlocked, so I went inside hoping to wash my face and wake myself up, only to find the interior lights barely working and the hallway stretching longer than seemed possible, lined with closed doors marked maintenance that shouldn't have existed in a public area. And halfway down the hall, I heard footsteps behind me echoing at the exact same rhythm as mine, stopping whenever I stopped, starting whenever I started, until I spun around and saw nothing there except the open entrance door at the far end. And suddenly the overwhelming feeling of being watched hit me so hard I rushed back outside without even using the restroom, convinced I needed to leave immediately. But when I reached my car and opened the driver's door, I froze because the passenger seat was no longer empty. The indentation in the fabric clearly showed someone was sitting there even though I hadn't seen anyone approach, the seatbelt slightly stretched as if pulled by an unseen weight. And before I could process it, the passenger side door slammed shut by itself with a violent force that shook the entire car, followed by the sound of breathing from inches away, even though there was no visible person beside me. Slow and uneven, like someone struggling to remember how lungs worked. And I scrambled to start the engine, but the keys slipped from my shaking hands, falling onto the floor. And while I reached down to grab them, I felt something brush against the back of my neck, cold and damp, lingering there just long enough to confirm it wasn't my imagination. And then a voice whispered directly into my ear in a tone so faint it was almost part of the silence, asking if I could drive it home. And every instinct screamed at me not to answer, not to acknowledge it. Yet the words slipped out anyway as I asked where it needed to go. And the voice responded with an address I didn't recognize, followed by a soft chuckle that didn't sound human at all, more like several sounds, layered together out of sync. And before I could change my mind, my hands moved on their own to start the car, as if I had surrendered control without realizing it, pulling out of the rest stop and back onto the highway, even though I had no intention of taking a passenger anywhere, invisible or not. And as the miles passed, the temperature inside the car kept dropping until my breath was visible in front of me, frost forming along the edges of the windows while the radio cycled through static and fragments of voices that almost formed words before dissolving again. And occasionally I caught movement in the corner of my eye, the faint outline of a head turning toward me, a suggestion of shoulders shifting. But whenever I looked directly, the seat appeared empty except for the unnatural depression in the cushion. And after nearly an hour, the GPS flickered back to life, showing a route I hadn't entered, directing me off the interstate onto a narrow rural road surrounded by dense trees that blocked out the moonlight. And I knew then that whatever was with me had been guiding the entire journey, not just sitting silently. And the deeper we went, the stronger the smell of damp earth became until it filled the car completely, making it hard to breathe. And finally the road ended at a rusted gate leading into what looked like an abandoned cemetery swallowed by overgrown vegetation, where the voice told me to stop and let it out because it was home now, and I refused, gripping the steering wheel. But the engine died instantly despite the tank being half full, the headlights flickering off as the passenger door creaked open slowly on its own, followed by the sensation of weight lifting from the seat beside me and footsteps crunching across gravel, even though nothing was visible. And just before the door closed again, I heard the voice one last time from somewhere outside, no longer a whisper, but a low-layered murmur thanking me for bringing it back, promising that I would not remember the road if I tried to return, and when the car suddenly restarted by itself, I sped away without looking back, not stopping until sunrise when the warmth of daylight finally pushed away the cold that had settled in my bones. Yet even now, years later, whenever I drive alone at night, I sometimes notice the passenger seatbelt slowly tightening on its own as if something unseen has just settled. In a place again, waiting for me to take another wrong exit and bring it home once more. The call came a little after midnight, the kind of call that feels wrong before you even answer it, the kind that drags you out of sleep with a cold feeling already crawling up your spine. My older brother Tyler had been in a car accident 2 states away, somewhere along a long, empty stretch of highway that cut through miles of forest and farmland, and my mom was already hysterical, begging me to drive out there, because flights weren't available until morning and she couldn't reach anyone at the hospital for details. I remember throwing on whatever clothes I could find, grabbing my keys, and stepping outside into the freezing November air where the silence of our neighborhood felt heavier than usual, like the night itself was watching me leave. The drive was supposed to take 5 hours, almost entirely along Highway 47, a road truckers used, but most locals avoided at night because of how isolated it was, and I told myself I'd be fine, that I just needed coffee and loud music to stay awake. For the first 2 hours, everything felt normal, just endless asphalt reflecting my headlights, dark tree lines on either side, and the occasional passing semi that shook my car as it roared by, but somewhere past the halfway point my GPS lost signal and my phone dropped to 1 bar, then none, leaving me alone with nothing but static on the radio and the hollow hum of my engine. That's when I noticed the car behind me. It hadn't been there before, but suddenly there were headlights in my rearview mirror, too steady, too centered, keeping the exact same distance no matter how fast or slow I drove. And at first I told myself it was just another traveler heading the same way, but after 20 minutes of it never passing, never turning off, never falling back, the unease started to grow into something sharper. I sped up to nearly 90, my hands tightening on the wheel, and the headlights matched me perfectly. I slowed down to 60, then 50, and they stayed glued behind me like they were attached by an invisible chain. The road stretched on in a straight line with no exits, no gas stations, no lights anywhere except ours, and the realization that I was completely alone out there hit me so hard I felt dizzy. Then the headlights vanished. Not like the car turned off or fell back into the darkness, but like they blinked out of existence in the span of a second, leaving nothing behind me but empty roads swallowed by blackness. I remember checking my mirrors over and over, my heart hammering, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, until the radio crackled to life with a burst of static so loud I nearly swerved off the road, followed by a voice that sounded warped and distant, repeating a string of numbers I didn't understand. I reached to shut it off, but the knob wouldn't move, stuck in place as the voice kept talking, growing louder, closer, until it sounded like someone whispering directly into my ear from the back seat. When I finally managed to rip the cord from the console, the car went silent again, but that's when I saw someone standing on the shoulder ahead. It was a woman in a long white dress, her back to the road, her hair hanging down past her waist, completely still despite the wind whipping across the highway. Every instinct screamed at me not to stop, yet my foot eased off the gas anyway, like something was pulling me toward her, and as I got closer, I realized her bare feet were black with dirt, her arms hanging at unnatural angles, and the skin on the back of her neck looked gray, almost rotting. At the last second, I slammed the accelerator and sped past, refusing to look at her face, but in my side mirror, I saw her head snap upward with a movement too fast to be human, her eyes reflecting my taillights like an animal's. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow, and I kept telling myself it was shock, stress, exhaustion, anything but what it felt like, which was pure animal terror. A mile later, my engine began to sputter. The dashboard lights flickered, the steering wheel stiffened, and before I could react, the car died completely, coasting to a stop in the middle of the empty highway. The darkness rushed in immediately, swallowing the world outside my windows, leaving me in a silence so deep it felt like being buried alive. I tried the ignition again and again, but nothing happened, Not even a click, and that's when something tapped on the rear windshield. Just once. Soft, deliberate. I froze, every muscle locked, too afraid to turn around, telling myself it was a branch, a bird, anything else, until it happened again, 3 slow taps that made the glass tremble. My eyes moved to the rearview mirror before I could stop them, and I saw her standing inches from the car, her face pressed against the window, her mouth stretched into a smile, so wide it looked like her skin might tear. Her eyes were completely black, no whites at all, and as I stared, paralyzed, her hand lifted and dragged slowly down the glass, leaving a dark smear behind. The passenger door handle jerked once, twice, as if someone was testing it, and the realization that the doors might not be locked snapped me out of my trance. I lunged forward to hit the lock button, but before I could, the engine roared back to life on its own, the headlights blazing on, and the figure vanished instantly like she'd never been there. I didn't question it. I slammed the car into drive and sped down the highway, tears blurring my vision, not caring if the engine failed again as long as I got away from that spot. The rest of the drive passed in a numb haze until the first signs of civilization appeared. Street lights, buildings, a gas station glowing like a beacon in the distance, and I pulled in, shaking so badly I could barely open the door. Inside, the clerk, an older man with tired eyes, stared at me like he'd seen this before. When I tried to explain, he just nodded slowly and asked what mile marker had happened near. When I told him, his face went pale, and he said there used to be a crash there years ago, a newlywed couple killed instantly when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel, the bride thrown from the car, her body never fully recovered. He said drivers still reported seeing her along that stretch, hitchhiking, standing in the road, appearing in back seats, always vanishing before anyone could reach her. I wanted to dismiss it as a local legend, something he told nervous travelers for amusement, but when I went back outside, I noticed the dark smears still on my rear windshield, shaped like the outline of a hand, and no matter how hard I scrubbed at it with paper towels and water from the squeegee bucket, it wouldn't come off. I drove the remaining distance to the hospital at sunrise, exhausted and hollow, only to learn Tyler had survived with minor injuries, a miracle considering the wreck. And everyone kept telling me how lucky we were, how it could have been worse, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me off that highway. Because when I got home 2 days later and parked in our driveway, I saw a faint fingerprint on the inside of the rear glass, pressed outward as if someone had been trapped in the back seat, trying to get out. And that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard 3 slow taps on my bedroom window, coming from outside where there was nothing but a 2-story drop to the ground.